Hi, this is Ike from Groovy Entertainment. Today's video is talking about the two cats of the 1970s. And the two cats are Garfield and Heathcliff. Now, Heathcliff came out in 1973 in the newspapers, and he made it all through the 80s. He had two TV shows in the 80s. One started in 1980 with Heathcliff and Marmaduke or something like that, with two Halloween characters inside that TV show. Then he came out in 1984 with Heathcliff in the Alley Cats or something like that. And that ran for a long time. I think from 84 to 86. Then he had a movie, Heathcliff the movie that came out in 87 that was at the theaters. And it was just a highlight of the TV show with new stuff in it. I got that somewhere, but I don't got it in my hand. So he could have been around a long time, but nobody ever talks about this character much. There, I don't think there were any movies that came out lately about this character. There were no more TV shows since the 80s, so he kind of came and gone. Then they made little books like this. They made a whole handful of these in the 80s. In the late seven, I think they started in 78. That they made books like these. This is an 84 copy, and I got another copy from the 80s. But that's all Heathcliff was. They didn't really bring a whole handful of these books. You could read them in order. They had comic books from I think from 74, I think 74, 75. They ran a bunch of comic books, and they ran up until the 80s. I think 87 was the last comic book. I don't got none of the comic books, so I can't show you any comic books of that sort. So this is Heathcliff. Now Garfield came out in 1978, and he came out in the newspaper also. And I don't know if there were any comic books, but there were toys. There were stuffed animals. There were little action figures. Like like little soft little toys. He had a Happy Meal. 'Cause I had some of the Happy Meal toys that came out in the 80s. He had his own TV show in the 80s. He had his own movie in the 80s. He even had his own movies in the 2000s in live action format. So for a character that came out late in the 70s, he kind of had a lot of stuff going for him. He was either in the Golden Books, he was on books on records, books on tapes. Now then, what do he was on books on tapes. I know that much. Books on record, I'm not too sure about. Yeah, that Heathcliff book with Dusty, so it got me real good. So that Garfield did more than Heathcliff did. Even so, Heathcliff came out before Garfield, about 5 years different. So I wonder why Garfield became so lovable and popular more than Heathcliff did, and why Garfield's still going. You can still read Garfield in all the newspapers. They even made books about Garfield. Little fat books of all the comic strips that you can read in order from the Sundays and the weekdays. I used to have a handful of them until I got rid of them. I think he had a TV show from 1988 to 1991 or 1994, during them years, and that was a good cartoon show. His Christmas special in '87. He had a bunch of specials that ran all through the '80s. He didn't have no early cartoons. I don't know if he had any comic books because I don't know much about Garfield early history. So why was he more popular than this character was? And if you want to go even far back with the Looney Tunes and the Pink Panther, Even Sylvester the cat had more stuff than Heathcliff did, and he was out. He came out in the 40s, and Pink Panther had a lot of stuff too. Of course, Sylvester and Pink Panther kind of beat both these characters out. I can't think of any more cat things. He had Tom. You had Tom the cat from Tom and Jerry, and he was popular, but I don't know if he was as popular as the Sylvesters and Pink Panther. But Heathcliff didn't really go too far. He made it through the 70s, made it through the 80s. People's repeats came out in the 90s, in the early 90s. Cause I was able to watch the Heathcliff second cartoon show in the 90s. I saw it in both versions. Cause they used to play the repeats after in the afternoon time. So when I got home, I got to watch Heathcliff in the afternoon time. Then they repeated him in the morning time, but on the Spanish channel. So I got to hear him in Spanish in the morning time. That's how I watched a lot of the repeats, 80s stuff, because they didn't repeat the 80s stuff in English anymore. So I saw Heathcliff in Spanish. I saw the Super Mario Bros. Super Show in Spanish. Saw Inspector Gadget in Spanish. Hello Kitty, I saw that in Spanish. I seen them in English when they first came out, but when they got repeated, that's the only way you can watch them again. And in that format. Even some of the Looney Tunes, I got to watch them in English and Spanish. But so I got to see the show kind of three different ways. Originally, repeat it in Spanish, and then repeat it in English again. And then when I got old enough, about three about 3 years ago or more, I did an unboxing about, but I can't find out when I bought it. I bought the complete collection of the Garfield show. I didn't buy the early '80s one, but I bought the '84 one with Inspector Gadget, the Super Marlboro Super Show. So now I get to watch them on my own time because they don't repeat old cartoons anymore. So you can't watch this ever on TV or the Marlboro Show or Inspector Gadget. And the same with this show too. You can't watch Garfield on TV in the cartoon format anymore because they don't repeat the old shows anymore. Now I saw this when it first came out in the '80s, '88. Saw it again when they repeated it in the '90s after school. Then I didn't see it anymore. And you can't. You could buy this show now, but I think they released it at censors. There's some stuff that aren't uncut in the show. So I don't know why they cut some of that stuff out. Now I don't know if it's true, but people on YouTube were talking about it. So so what character do you like the most? Heathcliff or Garfield? And do you remember if there any stuff that I didn't put in the video because I didn't know about of these two characters? So if you know anything else that I forgot to put in the video, leave it in the comments. It'd be nice to know more history about these two characters, or they had any more stuff. Now I know Garfield had a Play-Doh set. Not Garfield, Heathcliff. Heathcliff had a Play-Doh set that you could on Play-Doh inside this plastic thing of a mold of Heathcliff, and you push them together, and they made a Heathcliff thing. They even had that for a real a real stone down that you put in that heavy clay, and you could make a statue of him, and you could paint him any color you wanted. Now I remember that now because I had somebody had that when I was a kid, some friend of mine. So I remember seeing that thing, and there was a couple of toys of Heathcliff. Not very much. They were rare. They're even rare now. You go on eBay to find some of his toys, you're gonna be paying at least $70 for a toy that came out 40 years ago. So leave it in the comments what character you like the most, and if you know anything more about these two characters, leave them in the comments too. So do like this. I can't hold two books at the same time while hitting the off button. So please like, subscribe, share, and comment, and have a groovy day. We'll have another video coming out real soon.